And it's printing money. There's some people that do say, what's that when it comes to their cleanliness and stuff, do not want to do anything about it. Not that they can't, they just choose to be like they don't want to. And there's people that do, and yet there's no facility directly on, as in, I'm not talking you need to be registered for anything, I'm just talking about basic humanity. Yeah, that to me is what's that? Cleanliness. If that person chooses something to eat some food, yeah, let it split down.
A cost to taxpayers and legitimate waste companies struggling to survive.
It's very frustrating to see them doing what they should be doing, dealing with permits, paying for subsistence fees, paying for consultants, paying for professional advice. And then down the road, we see what's happening at Hosewood and Kidlington and Over and Wigan and Northwich, and apparently a blind eye is being turned to that while my clients are doing the right thing. So frustration doesn't begin to cover it.
News that the government will now pay to clear 48,000 tonnes of waste from 3 sites in the north of England is welcome, but organised criminal gangs continue to avoid millions in landfill tax. The EA wants the public to be its eyes and ears, while it uses the latest technology to try and stop them. Dan Whited, Sky News in Hosewood in Kent.
Well, Dan has also been in Wigan for us this morning.
The sort of quick solution that the government has announced this morning with a bit of fanfare is that they're going to be spent, well, they haven't said the amount, but it's going to be probably tens of millions of pounds to clear up 3 sites in the north of England. We've been up here in Wigan over the last few months reporting on this north-south divide. A lot of the residents, the MP here, angry really that the money,
the music for
the millions of pounds is being spent down in Kidlington, in Oxfordshire, Hosewood, in Kent to clear up the sites, but not up here in the north. The government has addressed that this morning. You can see we're beside the enforced closure fence here next to this dump here in Wigan. Tens of thousands of tons of rubbish, which as the crow flies is about 5 metres away from the kids' playground at this school and 10 metres away from the nearest house. It's had a real impact on the residents here. There was a fire last year, a major incident declared. The kids had to close, the school was closed for 3 days. So the government are throwing cash at this. They're going to be clearing up this site and 2 others here in the north of England. Of course, there's a bigger question as to how they can stop this happening again. And that's where this 10-point plan comes in that the Environment Agency have announced. There's lots of things in it. And primarily, it's about early intervention, getting the public reports in so that the EA can come and put the blockades and these fences in before they grow to this site. But there's other things they're doing as part of this. They're looking at removing permits, suspending permits for waste carriers who don't play by the rules, naming and shaming companies involved. When it comes to the site here in Wigan, though, look, there is relief, and one of the residents said they're over the moon. Some are angry that it got to this stage in the first place. We were chatting the last hour to the local MP, Josh Simons, Labour MP for Makerfield. This is what he had to make of the announcement.
Just behind me, this dump, on the other side of the huge waste pile is a primary school. The primary school playing fields where the kids play outside, they do their egg and spoon race in the summer. They've not been able to use that now for almost 18 months. And after we've done this, I'm going to go to the primary school, to their assembly, and tell them that the government stepped up. It's going to clean up this site and they will be able to use their playing field again. That will make those kids, their parents, the families, and the whole community really happy.
So while Josh is in the school telling the kids, that's good news for them. The argument amongst lots of the residents, not just here in Wigan, but there's other big sites. There's huge sites down in Gloucester, in Epping, elsewhere. saying it's all very well the Environment Agency saying, look, we want to work with the public to be the eyes and ears. You report it will come quicker. But many people said for months and months they've been saying that the rubbish has been dumped here and nothing happened. And there's a big question of just how under-resourced the Environment Agency is to tackle this problem. Some people say it should be transferred to something like the National Crime Agency, because this is not just one person with their white van dumping a mattress. This is organised criminal gangs, and they are making millions out of this. Just think that you can buy a bit of brownfield site for £20,000-30,000 and around £125 a tonne. That's what they should be paying for landfill tax. You multiply that by tens and tens of thousands of tonnes, you can see how lucrative this is for the organised criminal gangs. And I think the Environment Agency, DEFRA, big announcements today, but they are going to have a big fight on their hands to actually enforce this. People have told me off the record that they find it hilarious, these measures, allegations that they're going to, proposals that they're going to make clean-up squads and do unpaid hours for 20 hours to clean up areas like this. These are organised criminal gangs. They flaunt their money online, and they simply think that they continue buying cheap plots of land, dumping tens of thousands of tonnes of rubbish, and getting away with it because it's very hard to bring these prosecutions.
Dan Whitehead for us there. Time now to look at the weather.
Slowly. Yeah, what are you doing with that?
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean
Really
all
be
clear
elevated,
skies?
don't we?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors Sky News Weather.
The next few days will bring warm, dry and sunny spring days, along with some chilly nights, some patchy frost and stubborn overnight fog. For most of us, though, it's a fine afternoon with light winds. Early mist, fog, and low cloud will mostly have lifted and cleared to sunny spells, though grey skies could linger over central parts of England.
Did you
In
see
the
our
sunshine,
friend again?
temperatures will reach the mid to
The lady?
high teens. An onshore breeze will keep eastern coasts of England a little bit cooler this afternoon, and it will turn breezier and cloudier across the northern and western Isles, with some patchy light rain later. Bands of cloud and outbreaks of rain will make very slow progress into northwest Scotland tonight, but elsewhere it will be a dry, clear and chilly night with some light winds, fog patches and a local frost. After a chilly start and overnight mist, fog and low cloud will clear through Saturday morning and will leave long periods of warm, hazy sunshine. It will be cloudier across northern Scotland with outbreaks of drizzly rain at times.
All Clear Travel Insurance proudly sponsors Sky News Weather.
In the region, that damage will take years to repair, as we've heard yesterday. So that will have an impact in the long run, not just for a few weeks. So I would expect that to still be visible even in 2 or 3 years' time.
I'm surprised at the fact that Gulf nations and other nations that are affected by the transport restrictions that are being placed in the Strait of Hormuz were in that situation in the first place, that there weren't more, for want of a better phrase, ways of bypassing the situation in the event that there was a closure of the strait.
Well, I think it's just a feature of the resources are heavily concentrated in that region, and it's quite difficult to get oil and liquefied natural gas out of it without passing through the strait. And we're just feeling now, I think, the effect this is having on the global economy. It's just a major choke point in the region, and we're feeling those effects really ripple through the economy. Inflation is forecasted to go up, and I think we're going to see further price spikes, I'm afraid. And just today, the International Energy Agency has now recommended to look at demand reduction measures and presented a 10-point program how to cut energy demand to deal with the crisis.
We know in the early days of this that several countries around the world tapped into their strategic oil reserves in order to try to offset the rise in oil prices, particularly. As we know, of course, that's essentially a one-shot deal. You do it once, but it's difficult to re-establish those oil supplies. We know also several European nations, and Japan as well, have sent a joint statement saying they're going to take steps to stabilize energy markets. How do you think they're going to do that?
Very difficult. I mean, in the short term, governments can subsidize.
What if I told you you can go to university without any GCSEs or A-level? The government is now funding degree.
2022, during the energy crisis after Russia invaded Ukraine, we have seen billions, hundreds of billions of subsidies being paid to shield people from energy prices. But governments can do very little to control the international price for natural gas or for oil. And what government can do really is to help us transition away from using those fossil fuels in the first place, but that takes years. That's not going to happen overnight. So in the short term, I'm afraid all that government can do is to subsidize bills and help people conserve energy as much as possible.
And of course, it's not just oil and gas that we're talking about here. Of course, the headline is usually the price at the petrol pumps and heating prices and so on. But there are so many ancillary industries that depend on oil and gas and the byproducts in order to be able to function. I mean, the ripple effects of this are clearly not just restricted to energy supplies, but the impact that's going to have on those ancillary industries as well.
Absolutely. I mean, you may think just about food production and fertilizer that is made from fossil fuels, or you may think about, chips and how those are being produced. They need byproducts from oil and gas. Pretty much everything we do in our economy is dependent on fossil fuels, and therefore we're seeing these effects so profoundly in pretty much all of the sectors of the economy.
Yeah, and also now, it's very good to have you on Al Jazeera. Tap into your expertise to be able to break this down for us. Thank you very much indeed. You're watching Al Jazeera. Reminder of our top stories this hour. Iranian state media is reporting that high-profile military figures have been killed in U.S. and Israeli attacks. The intelligence chief for Iran's Basij paramilitary, Ismail Ahmadi, was among those confirmed dead. His funeral was held earlier on Friday. The spokesman for the Revolutionary Guard Corps, Ali Mohammed Naini, was also killed in one of the recent attacks. The IRGC said it would not allow morale to be weakened by his death. And U.S. President Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu say they are united in their war strategy in Iran. Earlier, Trump told Israel to refrain from attacking Iranian energy sites.
Some people go in and you could.
The European Union is attempting to deal with the spike in energy costs. Spain has just announced that it's going to reduce its tax on fuel products to 10% from 21% to ease the burden on consumers. And in a meeting in Brussels on Thursday, EU leaders demanded an end to attacks on energy and water infrastructure in the Middle East.
The war's most immediate impact on Europe is on energy. At present, the European Union's physical security of supply is secure. However, Europe is not immune to global price spikes. And as the conflict continues, energy prices continue to fluctuate. Just today, the gas price went up by 30% after attacks on Qatari gas infrastructure. These are reckless attacks on infrastructure and unarmed commercial vessels that raise costs and the question of future supply risks.
Steph Parsons, live for us in Brussels. So energy rising prices dominating the talks. How are European governments dealing with this?
Different categories of
Well, they haven't really reached any consensus on measures that are going to be taken by the European Union as a whole. And this comes amidst the announcement by the European Central Bank that they're going to cut the growth rate and also have raised the inflation predictions by 2.6% in the coming month. So what we're going to expect is, especially here in the European Union, to have very high energy costs. What we also see is that the UK is expecting energy costs of £300 per month, and this similar number will be felt here also in the pockets of European citizens here on the continent. Basically, what happened during the summit, which ended around midnight last night, is that they were discussing at length to reform a so-called energy trading system, which is a costly system, but it's meant to speed up the energy transition. And some countries, of course, are further in this development than others. So countries like Poland, for really asking the European Union to slow down this energy transition so they can save some money. But the general consensus was that there is no consensus on this. So at the end of the evening, basically, countries were asked to take their own individual measures. And what we're looking at now, as you already mentioned, Spain is lowering the tax on fuel. Germany has a different approach. They are going to see if they can have a special tax on for the energy producers, because they say this is an excessive crisis benefit that these companies are having, so they want to put the tax burden on their end. But countries like France, they don't have much space, room to maneuver in the budget to take these kinds of measures. So every country individual will have to find a way, maybe subsidies, maybe help the companies, industries, similar things that we've seen in 2022, just after the war on Ukraine, when the energy prices here also really went through the roof and people had to pay very high bills. So this is going to be maybe a similar scenario, but again, the European Union is still struggling to find a common consensus.
Step Aslan there in Brussels for us. Step, thank you very much indeed. Well, Israel's military is intensifying attacks across southern Lebanon, bombing civilian buildings and forcing hundreds of thousands of people from their homes. The army is being accused of cutting off the area from the rest of the country. France has been trying to mediate the conflict, but as Zaina Khoda reports from Beirut, there's no end in sight to the violence between Israel and Hezbollah.
A war in its third week, with no path towards a ceasefire. Israel is threatening that what's coming will be more intense and more severe as long as Hezbollah continues to launch rockets across the border and refuses to disarm. It's already expanded its targets, destroying bridges across southern Lebanon. Israel says they are on Hezbollah supply routes. Fuel stations, it says, are affiliated to the group, have also been hit. The Israeli military has ordered hundreds of thousands living there to leave. They have little choice, with an aerial campaign that has killed more than 1,000 people. Paramedics, too, have been targeted and killed. Their centers and ambulances hit. And while Israel says they are being used by Hezbollah, human rights groups say the strikes amount to war crimes. Israel is accused of cutting off the south from the rest of the country. Its troops are advancing into Lebanese territory. The Israeli army video shows them operating in border villages, but they have come under fire. Hezbollah is hoping to increase the cost of the war, but it's not clear how long it can sustain the fight. France has been trying to mediate an end to the hostilities, but before the French foreign minister's arrival, the Israeli Security Cabinet said it was discussing unprecedented action against Hezbollah. A clear message that a proposal by Lebanon's government to offer a permanent non-aggression pact with Israel was not enough. All the while, negotiations are being conducted under fire as both sides try to secure military gains for political leverage.
More than 1 million people are struggling to survive. That's 1/5 of the population. Some are living in tents or sleeping in their cars. The government is unable to deal with the challenge, and UN agencies complain about the lack of cash because of a shortfall in global funding for humanitarian aid.
Lebanon's appeals to President Donald Trump to stop the attacks have been met with silence. The U.S. has reportedly lost faith in a leadership that promised to disarm Hezbollah. So with no diplomatic opening, it's uncertain where this war is heading. Zaina Khoda, Al Jazeera, Beirut.
There's been another attack in the Iraqi capital. A drone targeted the Victory base. That's a U.S. military base close to Baghdad International Airport. It's faced repeated attacks in recent days, one sparking a large fire on the complex. Al Jazeera's Asad Beg is in Baghdad, and he says there's been no let-up in the attacks in Iraq.
Iraq is the only country that's been hit by all sides. It's been hit by Iran, it's been hit by America, it's seen strikes carried out within its own border by armed factions aligned to Iran. And there's, like you said, there's been no let-up in those attacks. We understand that 2 drones targeted Victory base near Baghdad International Airport. We understand one fired a projectile at the base, it was intercepted, and it crashed. The second drone, we understand, disappeared off radar. what
Linux not
really
good.
raising
Yeah,
questions,
Linux not
security
much.
questions, is that these drones, authorities say, are launched from within the vicinity of Baghdad. And what that tells you is that the US forces, US interests are surrounded by hostile factions. The other complication is that factions within the Popular Mobilization Forces, come under the Iraqi military, receive state funding, and some of those factions are aligned to Iran, and they continue to carry out attacks. However, we have not seen an attack last night against the US embassy. That's because on Thursday, one of those factions, Kataib Hezbollah, said that they would stop all violence under certain conditions. But again, those factions have also come under attack. We've seen airstrikes against their headquarters in Mosul, in Kirkuk, in Nevene province. But at the same time, we've also seen strikes in North Iraq, in the semi-autonomous Kurdish region, in that region's capital, Erbil.
Well, Iran's foreign minister has criticized the UK response to the war. According to the Iranian foreign ministry, Abbas Araghchi has relayed his thoughts in a phone call with British Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper. It said that Araghchi criticized what he called the negative and biased approach of the United Kingdom and some European countries towards US and Israeli aggression, which violates international law. They also denounced the UK for failing to condemn the Israeli attack on the South Pars gas field. He said they should not have condemned Iran's later retaliation. Araghchi also said the UK should not be allowing the US to use its military bases, saying these actions are definitely considered as participation in aggression and will be recorded in the history of relations between the two countries.
Oh, I remember that story. Because, Frank Hawaii.
President Gordon Sade is director of the think tank Diplo House. He's joining us from Tehran, and here in Doha is Zaidan Al-Khanani. He's founding director of Arab Perspectives Institute. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for being with us. I want to come to you first of all, Hamid, if I may. Just let's talk about this conversation that Abbas Araghchi has been having with the UK foreign minister, saying he's very critical of the way that the UK is responding to this and other European countries as well. But it is fair to say that the European countries and the UK are having to tread a very fine line between the loyalties that they feel they have towards the US, but also the questions that they were asking in the early days about the legitimacy of this action that the US and Israel was carrying out.
In the postal.
What we are facing and what Prime Minister Araghchi is criticizing is the mere fact that Europeans especially are following a stereotypical mindset that everything that the United States is doing correct and everything the others do against them would be wrong. And that's a wrong narrative to interpret the happenings on the ground. Because according to international law, the war that has been carried out against Iran, the aggression is against international law. And of course, many other activities of the Americans and Israelis are against international law. But the Europeans do not have the independence or the confidence to stand against that, and they have turned themselves into followers, or I don't like to use this word, but it's actually what they are doing. They are turning into a parasite government to the Americans. So they are connected to the Americans and they are feeding from the Americans. Whatever they say, they follow. Whatever they say, they obey, and they are sacrificing their own interests for the Americans. And now that they are paying the price for the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and increasing the oil prices, or the shortages of the fertilizers, which would actually lead to lack of food in the future. All of these things are imposing some costs, some extra costs to the European people, especially for the LNG and such things. And they are not ready to accuse the Americans and blame the Americans and Israelis for beginning this war. And they are actually blaming Iran and putting pressure on Iran for defending itself, which is according to the international law. So this double standard, we can say, this wrong position that they are taking is something that is not only not helpful for the resolution of the situation, but it's actually worsening it. So if they want to fix the problem, they need to fix the source of the problem, which is the American-Israeli aggression against Iran. They need to put pressure on the American side and the Israeli side to stop the aggression and to compensate for the damages.
Zaid, I want to talk to you about the dynamic that we've been seeing between the US and Israel. Donald Trump saying that Israel would not be attacking Iran's oil and gas facilities. Again, this is following, of course, the Israeli attack that was carried out on the South Mars field that Iran has, the subsequent response that we've seen from Iran on that. Is Donald Trump, in your estimation, actually in a position to be able to control what Israel is doing in this conflict?
Not completely, absolutely not. And we noticed this in the early days of the war, where the objectives and strategies may have diverged and conflicted. They might be unified in a unilateral alliance in targeting Iran, and definitely not allowing the US to consult with its GCC allies in the region. However, it seems like the fundamental differences in the approach, where Trump is interested perhaps in a regime change, which opens the door and opens a leeway for the US to recognize factions within the existing regime in Iran today, whereas Israel is mostly interested in defeating the regime as it is and in a much more form of state destruction within Iran. They might be unified in some of the military attacks and in coordination in most of them, but it seems like there are some differences, particularly when it comes to the attack on the energy infrastructure. Now, whether the Trump's administration was aware of it or claims to not be aware of it indicates two major things. One, it doesn't want to face an international and a European accountability in allowing to include the energy infrastructure in the conflicts. It also does not want to even further deepen the mistrust that US has created for itself as an ally to these GCC states.
Hamid, let's talk about the recent killings that we have seen of senior leadership members of the IRGC and also the intelligence chief for Iran's Basij paramilitary. One of the goals that had been stipulated right from the start, certainly by Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel, was that he wanted regime change, he wanted the leadership out, he wanted the people of Iran to rise up against their leaders. At the same time, there is a question, we were hearing this from Mohammed Val, our correspondent earlier on, there is a growing suggestion amongst the people of Iran that why should we be able to believe in our leadership when our military can't even protect our leaders, that they are being killed in such a fashion and apparently so significantly by and straightforwardly by Israel. Is there a risk, do you think, that these killings are actually undermining the belief, if you like, that the Iranian people may have in their leadership and their military's ability to protect them?
I'm not saying that we shouldn't, but I'm thinking, but is that healthy? Because
these terror activities and the assassinations are not degrading the Iranian government's power, because every official has appointed at least 3 up to 5 substitutions for himself. So anyone who is removed, killed, or whatever happens to them, immediately the next person would be replacing him or her. And there is no problem in the chain of command in the activities of those organizations. My interpretation from the current situation is that after a while that the Americans could not carry out any further strikes, achieve any goals in the war, they decided to give the control to the Israelis. The whole situation is now controlled by the Israelis. In the beginning, it was divided actually. The West was more Israeli side, the South was more American side activities. But now Israelis are in control and in command. And they are, since they don't have any further objectives to achieve, they are turning to assassinations and killing people and figures. So in order to make some achievements, to say that we have done something. And on the other side, they are trying to destroy the southern part of the country in order to pave the ground for actually opening the Strait of Hormuz, which is a different story. But this does not affect the activities of the Iranians and its power among the people. Yes, people are sad that a person like Ali Larijani is killed, a person like, for example, Minister of Intelligence is killed, or just this morning, Mr. Naini was assassinated. But it doesn't mean that they interpret it as a weakness in the government. They understand that it is war, and in war people are killed. And yes, it is very important to protect the officials, But on the other side, we know that there are people who are working with the Israelis, and they are giving intelligence, and we have actually infiltrators in our country. That's something that we had the experience in early years after the revolution. In one day, they killed more than 70 of our officials. So that experience is something that people have lived with, and they can remember what has happened, and they can understand. They don't accept it. They don't actually like it, but they understand that it is war and people can be killed.
Zainab, let's talk about the wider context in terms of the Gulf nations. Now, the Gulf nations for a long time, the understanding had been that by associating themselves with the United States particularly, and by hosting bases there, that would to some degree protect them not only from other existential threats, but particularly perhaps a possible threat coming from Israel as well. And there's a lot of concern now that about Israel's ambitions, should it, given the experience that it's having in Iran. How do you think the GCC countries are going to be reassessing their relationship with the US in terms of being able to protect it from whatever ambitions Israel may have in the Gulf in the future?
Well, there's a very strong realization that it's the GCC's fundamental strategic ally when it comes to international relations, economically and politically, which is the United States in this case, has prioritized Israel's objectives in this conflict, despite the divergences and differences in some aspects of it, meaning that they have even sacrificed the rationale of the existence of the US bases in the region for the sake of whatever rationale was put, and that was enough to convince the Trump administration to conduct this war. But simultaneously, the GCC is also in a very delicate position where, one, it is also trying to ensure that it is not associated with the Israeli-US strikes against Iran. But at the same time, it's also faced by direct targeting by Iranian attacks through the rationale of the Iranian regime's rationale that it's defending itself, although most of the attacks are directed towards the GCC states. Most of the attacks are directed towards the civilian infrastructure. And now it included the energy infrastructure, which doesn't only harm the economy of Iran, but the region and the rest of the world, which translate into that Iran is not only viewing Israel as a direct threat here, and not only viewing the US base's existence in the GCC as a threat, it's also viewing the national security and the existentialism of the GCC as a threat as well, which compares the expansionist agendas of both Israel and Iran, but in a very different way.
Zainab Al-Qanani and Hamid Reza Gholemzadeh, thank you very much indeed for joining us, gentlemen. Thank you.
Nothing else apart from
rising oil prices are driving up costs for Brazil's farmers during harvest season, where imported fuel powers vital machinery. With most cargo moved by road, higher diesel and fertilizer prices are now pushing inflation up ahead of a crucial election. Monica Yanakiev has more from Rio de Janeiro.
100%.
Truck drivers in Brazil say they're feeling the shockwaves of a conflict being fought thousands of kilometers away in the Middle East.
The United States started this war with Iran, but we're the ones feeling the consequences with fuel prices going up.
They've been threatening to go on strike, potentially bringing Latin America's largest economy to a standstill.
More than 60% of cargo goes by truck, and Brazil imports between 20 and 30% of all the diesel it consumes. As oil prices rise, the cost of harvesting crops and transporting them to ports is climbing quickly.
That's pushing up inflation and creating a political challenge for President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who is seeking a fourth non-consecutive term in October's election. Earlier this month, he cut fuel taxes and introduced emergency measures to protect consumers. But it may not be enough. Brazil's powerful agribusiness sector, highly dependent on imported fertilizers, warns the conflict.
Hello? Oh my God! Dylan. Everyone watching how we shoot up.
insanity. You couldn't expect anything else because everything they have has been from us.